I have a cold. I had been working on a talk for today that was not about diversity, that could not be construed in any way as UU bashing. I don't want to be known as the thorn in the stem of the UU chalice. And the fact that you're all willing to bear with me on this subject, and Reverend Sean's super supportive attitude, gives me a strength to keep at what I feel is an important conversation in our community. My having grown up in a Spanish-speaking Latino family, where nobody had a college education and some hadn't even graduated from high school, while at the same time having myself the last name of Ingalls, and not looking like a lot of native Spanish speakers in this part of the world, that has exposed me my whole life to some of the best and worst attitudes and behaviors displayed by both sides of my background. When I was an undergrad, I could not qualify for a certain Latino scholarship because I don't have a Latino last name. When challenging that, because there was no way I was just going to let that slide, I said to the review committee, let me make sure I understand this. If my father had been named Fuentes and my mother named Ingalls, then my name would be Fuentes, and you'd have no problem with my application. But since it's the other way around and my mom is Fuentes, I'm less Latino? They said, no, sir, you need to have a Hispanic last name in order to qualify for this award. I don't have statistical proof, but I feel like people from mixed backgrounds are more common here in Southern California than in much of the United States. And in my talk today, I apologize if my interchangeable use of Hispanic and Latino is confusing. They mean the same thing to me. I believe there's a perception that Latinos, especially the more fair our complexion, that we're just bilingual white people. We happen to speak a second language, but really, is that a disadvantage? Especially when your appearance makes most people think you just have a good tan. Yes, it's a disadvantage. There's more to being Latino than language and music and food. When I was a child, I thought that my grandfather was teasing us when he warned my cousins and me that if we played near any railroad tracks, that bad men would lock us up in train cars and ship us to Mexico. I thought he was making up boogeyman type stories. And then I got into college after he died, and I read about the police in the 1930s forcing Spanish-speaking US citizens onto trains that happened to be bound for Mexico so they could ship some of them home. My mom was born into 1930s Los Angeles, and those were the times that they lived in. I really can't see that happening to me today, but a fundamental distrust of white English-speaking people in authority is still deeply ingrained in Latino families for a variety of reasons. I used to manage the non-medical operations of English-Spanish bilingual family clinics in California and Nevada. And the doctors there, who were not Latino, were sometimes dumbfounded at what they saw as irrational behavior on the part of their patients. My mom is an excellent example of this behavior. When she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she went to psychics and healers and herbalists and did everything but get traditional Western medical care until the very end when it was too late. I'm not denigrating non-Western approaches to healthcare, but I also don't see the harm in taking advantage of everything that you can when you're faced with something like cancer. It metastasized throughout her entire body, and as she was dying a slow and gruesome cancer death, she confided in me that the reason she had not sought out traditional Western medical care was because, and I quote, she didn't want to be experimented on by those people. This is really fascinating to me in a very sad way. You've probably heard of the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. That's where clinical studies were conducted from 1932 to 1972 by the US Public Health Service to study the progression of untreated syphilis in African American men in Alabama. Those men were told that they were receiving free health care from the US government, but really, they weren't doing anything at all except letting the disease go untreated so that they could observe the effects of that on a human body. Those men were unwitting human test subjects. 40 years of biological experiments on people. My Hispanic mother in Los Angeles knew nothing about any of that going on in Alabama. But even she had a deep-seated fear and mistrust of white English-speaking doctors during the same 40-year period. And I don't believe that's just coincidence. People know on a visceral level when they are not safe. And in my family's experience, when my mom was a little girl in the 1940s, her grandmother died under very suspicious circumstances in a Los Angeles hospital. The mistrust that a lot of Latinos feel toward white English-speaking people in authority, that mistrust shows plainly in their eyes. I see that look of fear all the time on my daily commute using public transportation. Unfortunately, some people interpret that look of fear as fear of having been caught doing something wrong. They see it as a guilty look rather than the basic anxiety that it is. And it makes them suspicious, which causes them to interact differently with Latinos, which becomes a suspicious circle. One thing that I love about all of you here is that while you can't kick me out of UU society, not that you ever would, you can keep me from being up here in the pulpit, and you can keep me from representing you at things like General Assembly. And what you actually do is the exact opposite, and I feel like you're all on my side, even if we don't all agree on all of the specifics. And I want to thank all of you for that, and acknowledge all of you for that. Your attitude towards me makes a difference in my life. Now that being said, if the idea of hiring someone for a job with the UUA or in one of our churches, hiring someone for the express reason that they are not white, if that stirs a little resistance in your heart or just outright rubs you the wrong way, I'm talking to you right now. I have applied to various UU jobs and learning programs. I've never applied to be the music director anywhere, and I don't intend to anytime soon. So I want to use that as a hypothetical scenario to walk us through for a couple minutes. Let's say that one of our local churches has an open music director position, and I and another candidate are equally qualified. Hypothetically, we have the same music degrees and similar backgrounds. The other candidate is a lifelong UU. People in the community have known her or her parents for years. So the hiring congregation asks around to get a sense of this person as an adult. And some people remember that precocious little girl up at Camp de Benneville, and they just can't believe how fast the time has gone by. She's all grown up, and she's married, and now she's applying to be the music director in one of our churches, which is fantastic when that kind of thing happens. Now here I come applying for the same job. My Hispanic mother tried out some UU churches when I was a little boy, but she was not comfortable there, being asked things like where she went to college, which she never did, or even being invited to join people to go out for lunch after the service, which she couldn't possibly hope to pay for. So we stopped going to any UU church. And I did not really discover Unitarian Universalism until I was in my 40s. Even with equal qualifications, who do you suppose is more likely to get that music director job? I can tell you that I have never even gotten an interview for anything UU related to which I've applied. Never. Not even when there are multiple openings for the same position, which has happened to me more than once. And it's not like I'm thinking of a one-off event, and it's not like I go around haphazardly applying to things for which I'm not qualified. Caltech, where I've worked for the last 6.5 years, is one of the hardest schools in the world to get into. I think we're the only top school that does not do legacy admissions. So even if your parents and your grandparents all went to Caltech and donated millions to the school, you still have to get in there on merit. Statistically, it's even harder to get in as an employee. I've never been through such a grueling and intense application and interview process. For me, UU organizations have been even harder to get into. Does any of that mean that the UU community has something against Hispanic men? Well, not in my individual opinion, but I am painfully aware of what Unitarian Universalism can look like to outsiders who are people of color. When I was again declined to even be interviewed for the most recent UU-related thing that I applied for, I said to my husband, you know, Jason, there was a time when there were no women in UU ministry, and now the vast majority of our ministers are women. Obviously, that's what we want. It's the year 2015. If UUs really wanted to see people of color in their communities, we'd already be there in obvious numbers. Look around. This is not how I actually felt. I was upset in that moment. Saying that out loud to Jason felt inaccurate, even as I was saying it to him. I really do believe that we really do want not just people of color, but all kinds of diversity represented in our communities. So I am kind of confused. And that confusion all by itself is enough to keep people like me away from Unitarian Universalism. In my opinion, it is natural, especially in a job hiring situation, to go with the candidate that you feel most comfortable with, that you think you'll work the best with. And what is most comfortable is usually what's most familiar. And Hispanic men are not at all familiar in a UU setting. And our resumes and our applications are going to look different than your garden variety UU who is applying for the same job. I was a child laborer. I've gotten a W-2 tax form every single year since I turned 14. So I can list a lifetime of solid work experience on a job application. I cannot list a lifetime of UU experience, paid or volunteered, what's sometimes referred to as deep UU experience. I can't list that. And since most of you here today have been UU longer than I, let me ask you this. How many people of color do you personally know who could list years and years of UU-related experience on an application if they wanted to apply for a job with the UUA or in one of our churches? So let's flip this around to the traditional applicant's perspective. If I did get this hypothetical job, how do you think she would feel as a lifelong UU and well qualified for this hypothetical job if she didn't get it? Because the job went to the other qualified candidate, me, because I'm Latino. How is that right or better? What good could that possibly serve? And just as an aside, I want you to know that I'm anxious about giving this talk at all today, because it sounds a little bit self-serving, even to my own ears, but the only way to mitigate that is for me to either keep my mouth shut or to never apply to a UU job or learning program. I work with spreadsheets every day for a living, that's what I do, and this is why I think it's a good idea to hire qualified, non-traditional applicants. As of the last census, white people are only 42% of California's population, but still the vast majority of our congregants and our ministers and our employees. Remember the early 1990s? That wasn't very long ago. That's how far away in time we are from the year 2040. It's the same amount of time in the opposite direction. By the year 2040, non-white people will represent 70% of California's population and half of the entire US population. I did a Google search for UUA staff pictures because the UUA is the single largest UU entity that I could examine. And even I was surprised at how white we appear to be. Going through the directory, I counted 200 names. If you work the math, spreadsheets are good for this, if you have 8 to 10 job openings per year with the UUA, and the people leaving and filling those jobs are a mixture of white and non-white people, and you mandate that half of all open positions must go to a person of color, because we do apply, it's going to be just over 20 years from today before the UUA staff becomes only half white. But that 20 years is only if we mandate that half of all open positions must go to a person of color. Considering how much UUs love being told what to do, I don't see a mandate like that going into place anytime soon. If we continue on our current path with what looks to me to be about a 10% per year person of color hiring rate, then it's going to be just over 100 years from today before the UUA staff becomes only half white. But that will occur in an America that became only half white 70 years earlier. We are so very far from any kind of real diversity, and that is not happenstance. It's not enough to be welcoming to a diverse population. We've done that on a nationwide basis. If anything, I've seen us kind of pounce on visitors who are people of color and smother them with kindness because we do want so badly to see them in our communities. But feeling welcoming and being welcoming, that's only the first step toward actual diversity in our communities. What we are not yet is intentional about diversity. And you can see the result of that lack of intention in virtually any gathering of UUs. Hoping that a person of color might join one of our congregations, that might get our participation in the UU community. Hiring us would always guarantee it. Most of you know that my husband is a UU minister. What you may not know is that he did his internship in one of our most diverse congregations. After being part of my Hispanic family for 20 years, he easily stepped into that community. They're not even predominantly Latino. But after 20 years with me, my husband is now very sensitive to the concerns of a wider range of people than most UUs, in my unbiased opinion of my spouse. Just as an example of Jason's education from being married to me, I was surprised at how creative his brother's children are when you give them art supplies. And when I mentioned that to Jason, he said to me, well, you must have been the same way at that age. And I said, no, if I was lucky enough to get my hands on something like a box of crayons as a child, it was all about how long I could make them last, not about being creative. Even if I did nothing with them, but I daydreamed about what I could do if I always had them, that was better than the disappointment of running out of them. If the vast majority of UU leaders must be white, and that is in fact what they have been for hundreds of years and continue to be right up to today, I would like to see more UU leaders with the ability to look at situations and problem solving from a non-traditional perspective. If we start today intentionally hiring, or at least interviewing, people of color when they apply to UU jobs and learning programs, we're still looking in the neighborhood of 100 years before we begin to see actual diversity in our communities. There's work to be done around this issue. I will keep trying to be part of the larger UU community outside of my home congregation, but I do want you all to know that if I were not married to a UU minister, I might have gone away by now. It's hard to be in community to be in relationship with a community where you stand out no matter what, simply because of who you are, on top of not being able to see how that situation could change anytime soon. Being different is fatiguing. Even when, as in our communities, being different is seen as a good thing. Sometimes you just want to blend in and be part of the background. I would love for all of you to go home today and try to imagine the specific actions that we can take to grow with the communities in which we're located. And in your imaginings, I hope you come to realize how difficult it is to imagine anything from the perspective of someone who's very different from yourself. Wouldn't it be better if the UUs who were trying to figure out how to make us more attractive to a more diverse population were themselves people who came from that diverse population? At this time, for many people of color, the steps on the path to becoming UU can be more like leaps. If people of color are not prominently visible in UU communities, there's no easy way for outsiders, for visitors, for that rapidly changing face of America to know just how friendly we in fact are and how very much we do want to get to know them, unless they happen to come and spend a lot of time with us, which they're not likely to do if they don't already see themselves represented in our communities. Oh, I have visited several of our churches in California, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maine, New York, and Texas. And the more diverse visitors almost always bolt. They get out of there as soon as the service is over. The only reason, just like I did, the only reason that I first came to a UU church at all is because my blue-eyed husband brought me here. I never would have come on my own. So if you're single, I encourage you to go out and marry a person of color. That is how I got to be here. How else are we going to engage this country's changing demographics? Listen, diversity is good. My mother was not my only relative to intermarry outside of Latino culture. I have relatives who are from the Midwest. Some are Greek, some are French, some are British. Our Thanksgiving dinners include things like turkey and mashed potatoes and gravy and tamales and enchiladas. We have pumpkin pie and baklava and eclairs. Diversity is good. It's not just that I want Unitarian Universalism to continue to exist and to grow. I would love for more people to experience just how good diversity can be when it's a regular part of your life. My urban Los Angeles Hispanic mother and my husband's rural Indiana parents had lives that looked very different when they first met. But they got on so well together that they started going on vacations without us. And they experienced things together that they never would have if their sons had never met and fallen in love. Diversity is good. Reza Aslan is an Iranian scholar of religious studies, and I heard him say once, this is one of my favorite quotes. He says, "We don't get our values from our religion. We bring our values to our religion." It almost goes without saying that an openness to diversity is a value that virtually all UUs bring to our faith community. But I do think it needs to be said that a value is not an action. Diversity is good, but it needs to be helped along. It really does. It requires intentional action. I will close today. I could talk all day about this, but I have to stop. I will close by quoting for you my Mexican immigrant grandfather, who did not speak English well, and who caused enormous change for the better to occur for himself and for his family. These are the immortal words of Juan Fuentes. "If you don't like something, if you want for the life to change, to make more better, you have to get off your ass." I know that we can do this together, and I thank you for listening to me this morning and for all of the ways that UUs everywhere feed and nourish my soul. We're going to get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but I know that we will. Can we please all say these last words together? Amen.
Amen.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Namaste.
Namaste.
And blessed be.
And blessed be.